$10 and a dead dream. You just bought a curse, not a building. The rain was falling sideways when Jack Rourke stepped out of his rust-bitten truck, the kind of Appalachian rain that didn't tap politely on your windshield. It pounded like it wanted in. The courthouse loomed ahead, squat and gray against the choking sky, its windows like dead eyes watching him climb the cracked steps with his old military boots slapping through puddles. Diesel, his grizzled German shepherd, kept tight to his side, fur slick with rain, but posture alert, like he knew something Jack didn't. Inside the auction room stank of mildew and radiator heat. Damp coats steamed. Old ceiling tiles sagged. The air had that tension Jack remembered from his deployment days, quiet, watchful, and just shy of snapping. He took a seat in the back row, Diesel settling beside him like a shadow, and stared through the rain-streaked windows at a town that had clearly given up long before he ever showed up. Ashford, West Virginia. Population maybe 800 on a good day, less now that the coal mines had shut, and the factories followed suit. What was left were shuttered storefronts, prayer signs in windows, and people who no longer expected anything good to happen here. The auctioneer was a man built like a washing machine, broad, white-shirted, and running on low batteries. He droned through item after item, a rusted truck, 2 foreclosed trailers, a set of mismatched tools that looked like they'd already given up. But Jack wasn't here for tools. He was here for something everyone else had forgotten or tried to. Next up, the auctioneer said, flipping a yellowing page, Parcel 14B, 12 Maple Street, formerly Ashford Trust Bank, structure condemned, vault intact, minimum bid $10. That was it. No fanfare, just the words condemned and vault rattling in the stale air. The room went still. Conversations died mid-sentence. A man in a camo jacket chuckled. $10 for a tombstone, he muttered. Someone else added, that place is haunted in the tax records. The woman 2 rows up made the sign of the cross, half joking, half not. Jack raised his hand. The movement was deliberate, his fingers steady despite the dull thrum of anxiety building in his ribs. 10, he said. No one countered. No one even flinched. It was like watching someone volunteer to walk off a cliff. Going once, the auctioneer blinked. Going twice. Jack felt all the stares, the silent judgment from people who assumed he was either crazy drunk or desperate enough not to care. He wasn't any of those things. Not today. Sold. The gavel cracked. To the gentleman in the back. $10. A ripple of murmurs followed him as he stepped forward. Diesel moved beside him with measured steps, nails clicking on the warped wooden floor. A clerk handed him a clipboard and a stack of papers without meeting his eyes. Jack signed. The pen dragged heavy across the page. His name looked foreign in this place. As he slid the deed into a worn folder, a piece of yellowed paper slipped loose from between the pages, unofficial brittle hand, written in block letters, "The vault remembers what they buried." Jack froze. The ink was smudged, the corners curled like it had been waiting a long time to be found. He looked around. No one else seemed to notice or care. But Diesel leaned in and sniffed the paper, then let out a low, breathy chuff like an exhale made of memory. Jack tucked the note into the inside pocket of his jacket against his chest. When they stepped outside, the rain had eased to a drizzle, but the sky still hung heavy and low, like it hadn't quite decided whether to drown the town or let it rot slowly. He stood there on the courthouse steps, eyes fixed down Main Street, where the skeleton of the old bank waited. The red brick building had been shuttered since 2002, its windows blacked out, ivy curling like veins across its sides. Local legend said a man walked in one day and never came out. No one went near it after dark. But Jack had seen worse than ghosts. Diesel bumped his hip, urging him forward. I know, Jack muttered, ruffling the dog's ears. Let's go see what $10 really buys these days. The bank sat on a weedy corner, its sagging sign half erased by weather and indifference. Jack parked at the curb, engine ticking hot in the cool air. Diesel jumped out first, nose to the ground, ears rotating like radar. The front door groaned open with the resistance of time itself. Dust spilled out in clouds thick with mildew and the bitter tang of old paper. Inside, the lobby stretched like a funeral parlor, plaster, cracked furniture, skeletonized, a wall calendar still stuck on September 2002. And there at the center stood the vault. It was massively taller than a man, made of solid steel, its surface scarred and dark. Not with rust, with something deeper, a history. Jack stepped closer. The air shifted. Diesel stopped 3 feet from the vault and sat, eyes fixed, ears forward. Then, without warning, the dog let out a soft, whining growl. Not fear, not anger, something else like recognition. Jack reached out and pressed his palm against the vault's cold face. It didn't feel dead. It felt waiting. Jack steps back. The strange note still pressed against his chest. Diesel doesn't move from his post. The building is silent, but Jack knows it's not empty. Not really. And somewhere behind sealed steel, a truth is still breathing. The vault doesn't breathe. Where Jack begins a deeper inspection of the vault and uncovers the first signs of something deliberately hidden and never meant to be found. That door hasn't opened in 20 years, but it still feels like it's watching me. The silence inside the bank wasn't just quiet, it was suffocating. Jack Rourke stood in the dead center of the lobby, the beam from his flashlight cutting through the dust like a blade. Diesel sat stone still in front of the vault. Ears, stiff eyes locked on the great steel door like it might open by itself. The dog's body was tense but not fearful, something closer to reverence or warning. Jack slowly circled the room, his boots creaking on floorboards that had warped with time and water. The air was thick, sour with mold and rust. A faint metallic scent drifted from the vault, not like fresh iron, but like blood turned old. He stopped in front of it. The vault loomed taller than him, gray and dull, its intricate locking mechanism half-rusted, but still intact. The outer steel was covered in faint scratches, not from time or weather, but deliberate. Jack traced a long, arcing gouge with his finger. It hadn't been made by a vandal. It looked like someone had once tried to force it open. Tools, leverage, maybe fire. He stepped back and tilted his head. Welding scars. Near the hinges, the metal was warped and almost melted. The kind of scarring you saw when someone cut through and then tried to hide it. Someone had been inside this vault before. Someone with skill, time, and something to hide. But the vault wasn't talking. Jack pressed his palm flat against the steel. It was cold, but not lifeless. There was a kind of pressure in the air here, like standing on the edge of a storm that hadn't yet broken. His heart beat heavier than it should. His other hand slid into the inside pocket of his jacket, touching the folded piece of paper again. The vault remembers what they buried. He took a slow breath. What the hell did you see? He whispered, eyes on the dog. Diesel didn't move. Jack crossed the lobby, peering through the busted teller windows. Dust-caked chairs lined the wall behind them, half collapsed from rot. A bulletin board still held curling flyers and faded announcements. Someone had once tried to keep this place alive. Near the far side of the room, a splintered service desk caught his eye. Jack moved toward it, shining his flashlight under the counter. Paper fragments littered the shadows, receipts, rubber bands, old paper clips twisted with rust. And something else. A square piece of plastic, cracked but still intact. Jack carefully pulled it out with a debit card. Expired. Name Eugene Rayburn. The name didn't register at first, but then he froze. Rayburn. He'd seen that name on a rusted plaque outside a local cafe that was still operating 2 blocks away. Emma Rayburn, owner. He made a mental note. Maybe a relative. Maybe a coincidence. Diesel shifted behind him, claws clicking softly on the floor. Jack turned toward the vault again. It pulled at him not just out of curiosity, but something deeper, something that felt like duty or guilt. He looked around the room one more time. In a corner near the front windows, a toppled desk lay in pieces. Jack crouched next to it, brushing aside papers, until he found a narrow hatch in the floor of one of those utility access panels maintenance crews use to wire in power or check plumbing. He tried it open. The shaft below was dark and choked with dust, but he could see old conduits still running through. A few wires had frayed, but others looked surprisingly intact. If the vault had any electronic locks, and if the old server system hadn't been fully gutted, there might be a way in, or at least a way to find out what happened inside. Jack climbed back up and grabbed his gear bag from the truck outside. Rain had started again, light this time, soft enough to sound like static on the metal roof as he returned. He pulled a portable generator into the bank, dragging extension cords across the floor and wiring them into the old sub-panel near the teller stations. It took time, but he was good with his hands. Always had been. The Army taught him how to improvise, how to survive. Today was no different. A few lights flickered dim yellow, barely functioning. But enough. Jack walked over to a corner office, half-shattered glass still clinging to the frame. Inside, the old ATM stood like a relic, its screen covered in dust. He plugged it in. Nothing. Then a faint click. The screen glowed green. Lines of blocky text scrolled across, system locked. Last access, September 2002. Jack stared. A chill worked down his spine. He pressed a button. The machine beeped once, but nothing changed. No menu. No prompt. Just that frozen message. 23 years ago, he muttered. Diesel stood in the doorway, head cocked. The dog growled, barely audible. Not a threat. A signal. Something about this machine felt alive, like it had been waiting. Jack pulled the plug. The glow died. Outside, the storm thickened. Thunder rolled far in the distance. Jack turned back to the vault, shining the flashlight across its surface again. He crouched and studied the seam between the steel door and the wall. Diesel came to his side, sniffing along the base. The dog whined again, soft, mournful ears twitching. Jack put his face near the seam and paused. There it was. A sound. Faint but real. Air. Hissing through. Not like a breeze, more like a breath leaking from a lung that hadn't exhaled in decades. He reached into his jacket again and pulled out the note. Folded. Faded. The vault remembers what they buried. Jack closed his eyes. He could feel the story tightening around him. A town that had forgotten. A building they let rot. And a vault that had been sealed, cut, reopened, and sealed again. This wasn't just about money. This was about something no one wanted to find. Diesel let out a sharp huff, standing and turning toward the hallway that led to the back offices. Jack stood slowly, muscles tensing. He followed. Behind him, the vault stood still. But it was watching. The hallway yawned open ahead, darker than the rest of the bank. Jack's flashlight flicked once, then steadied. Diesel took the lead nose, low tail stiff. Somewhere down that corridor, the rest of the story waited. What happened the day the bank died? Why had no one tried to claim it? And what had Diesel just scented that made his posture change? Jack didn't speak. He just moved, step by step into the dark, and the vault behind them held its breath. Emma Rayburn enters the story, and Jack uncovers the first personal link between the bank's collapse and the lives it destroyed. This passbook is the only proof I ever had of that bank. The knock came just after sunrise. Jack Rourke blinked against the gray light seeping through the blinds, the smell of old paper and mildew still clinging to him from the night before. Diesel stirred at the foot of the couch, but didn't bark. He just let out a quiet, low whine as if he already knew who it was. Jack swung his feet to the floor. His muscles were stiff, still tense from crouching in the vault room for hours, listening to silence that felt far too alive. Another knock is soft, uncertain, but insistent. He opened the door slowly. A woman stood on the porch, hunched slightly from age, shoulders wrapped in a knitted shawl. Her cane tapped once on the wood before she lifted her gaze, eyes pale with time but unwavering. In her hand she held a small, worn booklet. "Mr. Rourke?" she asked, voice barely above the wind. He nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She extended the booklet toward him like it was a fragile artifact. "I heard you bought the bank." Jack took the passbook carefully. The cover was cracked, its corners frayed. The embossed lettering had faded, but he could still make out the words, Ashford Trust Bank. Inside were handwritten entries, deposits in $5, $10, $20 increments stretching back years. The last one was dated September 2002. "I kept it all this time," the woman said. "That money was everything I had." Jack looked up. "They told me the accounts were gone," she continued, eyes misting, "that there were no records. I came one morning to withdraw, and the doors were locked. No warning, no explanation. I wrote letters, called, waited, but no one ever answered." Her fingers tightened around her cane. "This passbook is the only proof I ever had of that bank." Jack felt the words settle in his chest like a lead weight. He stepped aside and gestured toward the small table near the window. "Please," he said. "Come in, sit." She hesitated, then nodded, and moved with careful steps across the threshold. Diesel stood to the side, watching her closely. When she passed, he followed and lay at her feet like a sentry. She lowered herself into the chair with practiced care. Her hands rested on the table, thin and trembling slightly. "I'm Agnes Rowley," she said. "Born and raised right here in Ashford. My husband passed in '98. That account was all I had left. Every month I'd walk down Main Street and make my deposit. I trusted that bank." Jack sat across from her, still holding the passbook. Agnes looked at him, something firm behind the sadness. "But I know it wasn't just me. Others lost more. Some lost their homes, their savings, their future. And we all just let it go. Because no one ever fought back." Jack opened his mouth to speak but stopped. Instead, he stood and walked to the kitchen counter where he'd laid the envelope he found under the teller's desk. He brought it back, sat down, and placed it in front of her. She stared at it. "What's this?" "Letters," Jack said. "Written by people like you, asking for answers, demanding the truth. They were never mailed, never processed, just hidden." He opened the envelope and laid out a handful of the contents. The ink was faded, some pages yellowed to the color of old parchment, but the words remained. I need to know what happened to my pension. My loan payments stopped showing on my statements. We were promised an extension. Why is our home being foreclosed? Ness pressed a hand to her mouth. These weren't lost in the chaos, Jack said quietly. They were deliberately buried. Tears pooled in her eyes but didn't fall. She picked up one of the letters, ran a finger along the edge. Who would do this? Jack shook his head. That's what I'm trying to find out. Agnes sat in silence for a long moment, then placed her passbook beside the letters. I don't know what you're chasing, Mr. Rourke, she said, voice rough with emotion. But if you keep going, don't let them scare you off. We've already lost too much silence. He nodded once firmly. I'm not stopping. She pushed back her chair and stood with Diesel rising at her side like a shadow. Before she turned to leave, she looked Jack in the eye one last time. Some of us have waited 20 years to be heard. Don't let our voices die in that vault. Jack walked her to the door. She stepped out onto the porch, the early morning light catching in her silver hair. Then she was gone, cane tapping gently down the sidewalk. He stood there, still holding the passbook in one hand and a letter in the other, and let the silence settle again. Diesel brushed against his leg. Jack looked down. We're not alone in this, boy. The dog gave a soft huff. Jack turned back inside. The vault hadn't moved, hadn't made a sound, but somehow it felt heavier now, like it knew its secrets were starting to seep through the cracks. He set the letters back into the envelope, careful, like laying someone's bones to rest. Then he slid open a drawer and pulled out the debit card he found yesterday. Eugene Rayburn. He hadn't forgotten the name. He hadn't forgotten the altered blueprint either, the one with a second vault marked in pencil, as if someone had intended to change everything and then disappeared. There was someone else who might know more. Jack grabbed his coat and keys. Diesel was already waiting at the door. The cafe stood near the edge of town, a single-story brick building with a flickering neon sign and a porch that sagged under the weight of memory. The painted window read, Rayburn's Cafe. Est, 1984. Jack stepped inside. Warm light. The smell of coffee. A woman behind the counter looked up, early 30s hair in a loose braid, sleeves rolled to her elbows. She moved like someone used to keeping things running, even when everything broke down. He approached slowly, sliding the debit card across the counter. Do you know who this belonged to? She picked it up. Her eyes narrowed. Yeah, she said after a pause. That was my dad's. She looked up at him. Who are you? My name's Jack Rourke. I just bought the old bank. A beat of silence. Then her expression changed. Something flickered behind her eyes. Not surprising. Not anger. Fear. Emma opens up about her father's disappearance, and Jack begins uncovering a more personal, more dangerous layer to the bank's history. My dad worked here every day until it closed, and then he vanished. For a long moment, Emma Rayburn just stared at the card. She didn't blink, didn't speak. Her fingers gripped the edge of the counter like she was holding on to something much heavier than plastic. Jack watched her closely, giving her space. He knew that look. He'd seen it in war zones, in grieving mothers, in soldiers reading letters that shouldn't have reached them. The look of someone suddenly ripped back in time. That was the last card he used, she finally said. Her voice was quiet but steady. It stayed in his wallet until the day he walked into that bank and never came home. Jack nodded once, slowly. I'm sorry, he said. I didn't come here to dig up pain. Emma let out a dry laugh, bitter, not amused. Pain's the only thing that ever comes out of that building. She motioned to a booth near the front window. Sit. I'll make coffee. You look like hell. Jack didn't argue. A few minutes later, she slid a mug in front of him, then sat across the table with her own cup. Outside, the morning sun was trying to cut through the clouds, but the gray still lingered. Diesel lay under the booth, calm but watchful. Emma took a sip and set the cup down. My father, Eugene Rayburn, was the senior accountant at Ashford Trust. He worked there for 15 years, never took a sick day. I always came home at 5:40. Always. Jack listened silent. The day it shut down, she continued. He left for work like usual. That morning, he even packed 2 lunches, said he might be staying late to help with some transition stuff. Her hands tightened around the mug. By nightfall, no one knew where he was. The bank was sealed. The officials said everything happened fast. Liquidation investigation, some federal notice we never got to see. They told us he probably left town, that he'd been part of the collapse and ran. Jack leaned forward. You don't believe that? Emma shook her head hard. My dad wasn't a thief. He wasn't perfect, but he was decent and loyal to a fault. She took something from her coat pocket and placed it on the table. A ring of keys. Those were mailed to me 3 weeks later. No return address. Postmark from Pittsburgh. One of them fits the vault. Jack's brows lifted. Wait, you've been inside, Emma scoffed. Hell no. I couldn't bring myself to walk in. But I've driven by that building 1,000 times, telling myself one day I'd go back and open that door. Jack picked up the keys and thumbed through them. I think we need to, he said. Emma looked him straight in the eye. If we do this, we won't stop halfway. We see it through. He nodded. I'm not here to stir up ghosts. I'm here to bury them properly. The bank looked even more broken under daylight. Windows clouded with grime vines crawling higher across the brick, the front steps cracked like fractured bones. As they approached, Emma paused before the entrance. Her breath hitched just once. Jack pushed the door open. Inside, the lobby seemed darker than before. Jack switched on the generator again, bringing a few hanging lights back to life. Emma followed slowly, her boots echoing on the floor. She stopped in front of the vault. I haven't seen this in over 20 years, she whispered. Still gives me chills. Jack handed her the keys. She stared at them, then stepped forward. Her hands trembled slightly as she slid the longest key into the outer lock. It turned with a deep metallic clunk. A mechanism inside shifted, then silence. That's as far as I've ever gotten, she said, stepping back. Jack approached and inspected the wheel. It was rusted, but movable. He twisted it slowly, each turn groaning through the room, like the grinding of old bones. The vault door clicked, then creaked open, just 2 inches. Then stopped. Something heavy blocked it from the inside. Jack shoved harder. Nothing. Diesel sniffed at the opening and immediately whined, backing up. His hackles raised. What is it, boy? Jack crouched, peering through the crack. Inside was pitch black. He flicked on his flashlight. The beam cut through the dust and landed on something unexpected. Wood. A large shelving unit had been dragged across the door from the inside as if someone had barricaded themselves in or out. Jack stood up, wiping his hands. There's another way in, has to be. Emma frowned. What do you mean? He crossed to the teller counter, pulled out the altered blueprint he'd recovered days earlier, unrolled it on the floor. Look here, he pointed. Original vault on the west wall. But this line, this isn't original. Someone sketched an access point that leads through the accounting office. Emma's eyes narrowed. That office was my dad's. Jack stood. Then let's see what he left behind. The back hallway was darker than the lobby, lined with warped doors and peeling paint. Emma hesitated in front of one, her fingers tracing the nameplate. E. Rayburn. She opened the door. Inside, the air felt heavier, like it hadn't moved since 2002. Stacks of files still sat on the desk. A photo of Emma as a teenager was tucked into the corner of the monitor. Jack scanned the walls, then crouched near a cabinet. There. A floor vent slightly misaligned. He removed the grate, revealing a narrow shaft. At the bottom, a bundle of blueprints sealed in a plastic bag. He pulled them out. These weren't supposed to be found, he said. Emma opened one eye, scanning quickly. Jack, this shows another vault. Smaller, reinforced, not listed on any official record, she pointed. And this wall leads to the break room. Jack stood. Let's check it out. In the break room, the fridge still stood, door ajar. Rusted soda cans, ancient wrappers. Jack tapped the wall Emma had pointed out. Hollow. He knocked again. Different tone. A false panel. He dug through his tools, pulled out a crowbar, and pried the panel loose. It fell with a puff of dust, revealing a narrow concrete corridor behind it. The walls were unfinished. Pipes ran along the ceiling. Diesel stepped forward, then stopped and barked sharp and clear. At the end of the corridor, a second steel door. No markings, no handle, just a keypad. Emma exhaled. We're in it now. Jack nodded, stepping toward the door. This wasn't about just hiding money, he said. Someone built this to keep something buried. Emma stared at the blank metal. My dad worked here every day until it closed. And then he vanished. She reached out and placed her hand against the door. Behind the cold steel, silence answered, but not for long. Jack digs into the old microfilm system and discovers the money was never lost. It was redirected. The real conspiracy begins to take shape. They didn't lose the money. They moved it. The light in Eugene Rayburn's office flickered like it was trying to warn them. Jack sat on the floor, surrounded by stacks of papers, cracked binders, and dust-caked ledgers that hadn't been touched in over 2 decades. Emma hovered near the door, arms crossed, eyes sweeping every surface like a cop returning to the scene of a crime that had never been solved. In the corner, Diesel let out a quiet growl, not threatening, but restless. Jack followed his gaze to the desk. There was something off about it. The drawers didn't sit flush. He slid one open. Inside were more outdated forms, a few check stubs, a broken ballpoint pen. But when he reached into the back, his fingers brushed metal. He pulled it out slowly. A microfilm cartridge. Emma's breath hitched. That's bank archival format. All internal transactions were backed up that way. Jack examined the label. Week ending Sept 27, 2002. He stood eyes scanning the room. Where's the reader? Emma turned, motioning toward the storage closet. There should be one in here. I remember my dad used it after hours and said it was faster than digging through the digital logs. They dragged out the clunky machine together with a squat, boxy thing with a yellowed screen and wheels that squealed against the tile. Jack blew off the dust and plugged it into one of the working extension cords. It sputtered, groaned, then flickered to life. He loaded the microfilm and began spinning the dial slowly. Line by line, black and white ledger entries rolled across the screen. Most were standard checking deposits, loan payments, wire transfers. Then Jack stopped. Account Exos 9244, $1.3 million wire transferred. Destination redacted. Emma leaned in. That's not a real account. He turned the dial again. Account X0882 $980. $1,000. Trust Consolidation Destination, Ashford Foundation Nonprofit. What the hell is the Ashford Foundation? Jack asked. Emma's face hardened. I've never heard of it. If it was real, it would never operate publicly. Jack rewound and found a series of entries from the same week, each showing large sums transferred quietly out of active accounts and funneled into shells. The names tied to them had been whited out, replaced with X, deliberate, not accidental. They didn't lose the money, Jack muttered. They moved it. Emma turned toward him slowly. On purpose. He nodded, gripping the sides of the machine, and they used the chaos of the bank's collapse to cover it. Emma paced the room, mind racing. If these files were buried here, hidden in my dad's office, he must have found something. Something he wasn't supposed to see. Jack stared at the screen, which means he didn't vanish. He was silenced. She didn't respond, but he saw her jaw tighten. It was the kind of silence that hurt more than shouting. Jack kept scrolling through the microfilm. Dozens of records, hundreds of thousands moved disguised as insurance claims, internal audits, or charity transfers, all leading back to a network of accounts and entities no one in town seemed to know existed. They gutted this town, Jack said. Not just the bank, all of it. Savings, retirement, loans. They bled it out from the inside. Emma rubbed her arms, suddenly chilled. And the people trusted them. My dad worked for those people. Jack paused the reel. They used him. Emma's eyes glistened, but she didn't let the tears fall. Suddenly, Diesel barked sharp alert. Jack shot to his feet, moving to the door. From the hall came the sound of something falling. A soft crash. Then silence. He looked at Emma. Stay here. Diesel was already moving low to the ground, tail stiff. Jack followed him out into the corridor. The hallway stretched empty, but the air had shifted, like someone had just passed through. He checked the front lobby. The door is still closed. No broken windows. But the curtain near the side exit fluttered slightly. Someone had been watching. Back in the office, Jack relocked the microfilm in a metal cabinet and pulled out his phone. No signal in the building. He glanced at Emma. We need to make copies. Digitize this. If we lose that film, it's over. Emma nodded. I know someone. Runs a tech repair shop out of his garage. He could do it. Can you trust him? She paused. He was one of the people who lost everything. If he knew what we found, he'd probably help us for free. Jack handed her the cartridge. Be careful. She left with Diesel at her side, the dog unwilling to let her go alone. Jack stayed behind. He turned back to the vault door, the second one they had uncovered. The keypad blinked red, waiting for a code no one remembered. Jack ran a hand through his hair, thoughts spiraling. If Eugene Rayburn had discovered the truth, and this hidden vault was where the real evidence lay, then Jack was standing on the threshold of something far deeper than a small-town scandal. He was standing on the edge of a conspiracy, one that had been stolen from hundreds, one that had taken a man's life. Jack sat down and spread the copies of the altered blueprints across the floor. He cross-referenced the utility maps. The second vault was powered. Barely. A backup line ran into it from the old server room. He could maybe reroute power from the generator and force a diagnostic to trick the system. But not alone. He needed someone who knew this place. Someone who had been there during the collapse. The next morning, Emma returned with a flash drive. Her eyes were wide, her voice breathless. I looked up the Ashford Foundation, she said, slamming the drive onto the table. It never existed on paper. No tax ID, no website, no grants. But it's mentioned twice in Old Town Council minutes from 2001. Who brought it up? Jack asked. She hesitated. Sheriff McNamara. Jack's stomach turned. You're saying the man in charge of investigating the collapse might have helped engineer it? Emma nodded. And if he's still in town, still watching us? Jack's fists clenched. Then we need to move fast. He stood, slipping the flash drive into his pocket. There's one man left who might have seen the wiring in that vault firsthand, he said. He worked maintenance. Disappeared a year after the bank folded. But I found a name on the blueprints. Emma raised an eyebrow. Who? Jack looked toward the door. Eli Whitmore. Jack tracks down Eli, who confesses to being ordered to destroy key evidence during the collapse, and now hands Jack a folder he wasn't supposed to keep. I was paid to erase the truth, but I kept a piece of it anyway. The gravel popped under Jack's tires as his truck pulled onto the dirt road that snaked through the hollows outside Ashford. A dense canopy of trees shaded the path, their branches weaving together like they were trying to hide whatever lay ahead. Diesel sat in the passenger seat, head low tail, still, his silence more telling than any growl. Jack checked the GPS again. No signal, just like the last 2 miles. He was running on a name and a whisper: Eli Whitmore, former maintenance foreman for Ashford Trust Bank. According to a faded employee list Jack found in the microfilm cabinet, Eli had worked through the bank's final months and disappeared soon after. But one of the blueprints, scribbled in pencil unsigned, had the name Whitmore next to a wiring reroute beneath the second vault. The man hadn't left town. He'd just gone quiet. At the end of the road sat a crooked cabin half swallowed by the woods. Moss grew on the roof. A pickup older than Jack's rusted in the driveway. A no trespassing sign hung lopsided on a tree, and a red thread was tied around the mailbox post, a sign Jack recognized from his army days. If you're not welcome, don't step further. He parked anyway. Diesel jumped out first, ears up, but not bristling. Jack took that as a good sign. He stepped slowly toward the porch. Eli Whitmore, he called. No answer. He tried again. Then the screen door creaked. An old man stepped out, shotgun in hand, not pointed but not slung either. His face was weathered like rock, his beard thick and gray. His eyes, though those were sharp, not wild, just tired. Are you the guy asking about the bank? Jack held up his hands, palms out. Jack Rourke. I'm not here to cause trouble. Diesel sat down beside him, calm but alert. Eli studied the dog, then Jack, then lowered the shotgun slightly. What do you want? Jack reached into his coat slowly and pulled out the copy of the altered blueprint. He unfolded it and held it out. You marked this reroute. Eli didn't look surprised. He stepped forward, took the paper, studied it for a long moment. Then he exhaled like the truth had been sitting on his chest for 2 decades. Come on in. Inside the cabin was cluttered but not dirty. Tools hung on hooks with military precision. A wood stove hissed in the corner. Old radios lined the shelves, most tuned to static. Jack sat at the kitchen table while Eli made coffee. Diesel lay by the door. I was the last man in that bank before it went dark, Eli said, pouring 2 mugs. They told me to shut down every subsystem connected to the lower vault. Told me it was for security compliance before the federal audit. Jack took a sip. The coffee was strong, bitter, and ground. But that wasn't what it was, Jack said. Eli shook his head. Hell no. A week before I saw your girl's father, Rayburn, digging through archive logs. It looked like he hadn't slept. He told me something wasn't right with the numbers. Said accounts were disappearing full portfolios. He asked me to pull wiring blueprints for the subvault. Said he didn't trust the digital copies anymore. Jack leaned forward. What happened next? Eli looked down at his mug. 2 days later, they locked him in. Jack frozen. What they told me, he'd been reassigned. But I saw his car out front for 3 nights, unmoved. On the 4th, it was gone. Jack's grip on the mug tightened. You think he died in there? Eli's eyes were steady. I think he found something they couldn't afford to let walk out. Silence pulsed through the room. I was paid to erase the truth, Eli said, but I kept a piece of it anyway. He stood, walked to a rusted filing cabinet, and pulled out a manila folder bound with twine. He handed it to Jack. Jack opened it slowly. Inside were faded photographs and surveillance stills from inside the bank's server room. One showed Eugene Rayburn bent over a terminal. Another showed the vault door open and pallets inside wrapped in plastic and marked with federal seals. Beneath the photos were access logs. Dozens of transactions logged at 2 a.m., all signed off by a name Jack recognized from the town council records, Croft Industries. What is this? Jack asked. Eli lit a cigarette, hands shaking slightly now. Croft was funding the fake nonprofit Ashford Foundation. They were washing the money through shell companies. Your bank was just a laundering station. Jack turned the pages, his stomach turning. But why bury it? Eli looked him dead in the eye. Because they weren't just stealing money. They were moving federal relief funds. Post-9/11 infrastructure cash meant for other states. The kind of crime that doesn't get exposed without someone getting buried with it. Jack exhaled slowly, and Eugene was going to blow the whistle. Eli nodded. And now you're standing where he stood. Diesel stirred at the door. Something outside. Jack closed the folder. They know I'm digging. Eli stood peering through the curtain. Then you better stop doing it alone. Jack looked up. You're in. The old man gave a half smile. Hell no. But I'll get you through that vault door. I kept the diagnostic codes. They loaded up Eli's tools and drove back into town. At the bank, Jack unlocked the side entrance. Eli moved slower now, but with purpose. In the corridor behind the break room, they faced the steel door to the second vault again. Eli ran his fingers across the keypad. Then with practiced rhythm entered a series of numbers. Beep, beep, click. The lock disengaged. Jack stepped forward, heart pounding. He pulled the door open. Inside was darkness, still and cold. They entered with flashlights. The beam revealed a long, narrow chamber lined with file cabinets. A table in the center held sealed boxes, each marked with the same stamp, Confidential U.S. Infrastructure Trust. Emma's father had been telling the truth. He hadn't just found financial discrepancies, he'd uncovered a federal crime. And now Jack was standing in the middle of it. Eli stepped back toward the door. You better copy every damn thing in here. They buried this once. They'll do it again. Jack turned to him. Not this time. Jack and Emma scanned the vault contents, but a break-in at Emma's cafe signals they're being watched, and the enemy is closer than they thought. They didn't break in to steal. They broke in to warn us. The cafe smelled like smoke. Not the thick, choking kind that came from fire, but the acrid, bitter scent of something intentionally scorched. Jack pushed the door open with Diesel at his side, boots crunching over broken glass and splinters. A chair lay overturned near the counter. The front window had been smashed clean through. Emma stood in the middle of the chaos, her jaw clenched and knuckles white around a baseball bat. You okay? Jack asked, stepping carefully inside. She nodded stiffly. Didn't get here in time. I closed up at 10, came back at 5 to prepare breakfast and found this. Jack surveyed the damage. Nothing was missing, no cash drawer popped, no electronics taken. Just chaos. Furniture flipped. The cabinets opened. Storage bins dumped out. It wasn't a robbery. It was a message. He crouched near the counter and picked up a scorched envelope. The edges were blackened, but the center was intact. He unfolded it. Inside was a single page torn from an old ledger, just like the ones in the vault. In bold red marker across the front, it read, "Leave the past buried." Jack held it up. They didn't break in to steal. They broke in to warn us. Emma's face was unreadable. Someone's watching. They've been watching, Jack said. Since I bought the damn bank. Diesel growled softly at the door, his ears pinned back. The dog moved toward the window and sniffed. Then without hesitation, he leapt out into the street and turned left, disappearing around the corner. Diesel Jack shouted, rushing after him. Emma followed. By the time they caught up, the dog was pacing near the alley behind the cafe. A spray-painted mark on the brick wall caught Jack's eye and circled twice. He turned to Emma. "Have you ever seen that symbol before?" She shook her head. "No, but it's fresh." Jack took a photo of it. "I'll run this through some old gang tags and security firms. Could be connected to Croft." They headed back to the cafe, locking the doors and closing the blinds. Jack didn't say it aloud, but he knew this wasn't random. This was a test. Someone was checking how close they'd gotten to the truth and how far they were willing to go to keep chasing it. Emma poured 2 cups of coffee with shaking hands. "I don't get it," she muttered. "We're nobodies. This town has been dying for years." "Why would they care now?" Jack sat at the counter. "Because we found the part they couldn't erase." He placed the manila folder from Eli onto the counter. Emma opened it slowly. The files were dense copies of the documents they'd pulled from the second vault. Transaction records, off-book accounts, and most damning of all, an internal memo marked Confidential Croft Holdings LLC. The memo referenced something called Project White Lantern and listed Ashford Trust as a Phase 1 terminal node. "What the hell does that even mean?" Emma asked. Jack shook his head. "I don't know, but it's bigger than just stolen money." He tapped the memo. "This sounds like infrastructure manipulation. Using financial institutions to reroute federal contracts may even create bottlenecks in disaster relief or emergency grants." Emma looked up, horror creeping in. "You're saying this wasn't just about cashing in. It was about control," Jack nodded grimly. "Control through scarcity. Control through disappearance. If they could make an entire town's money vanish, what else could they make disappear?" She stood suddenly pacing. "My dad tried to stop this, and they sealed him in a vault." Jack was about to respond when his phone buzzed an unknown number. He answered cautiously. "Jack Rourke." A pause, then a voice low and precise. "You need to stop." Jack frozen. "You're poking around in things that buried men smarter than you," the voice continued. "This isn't justice. This is suicide." Jack's voice hardened. "Who is this?" The line clicked dead. Emma stared at him. "Let me guess." Jack nodded. "They're scared." She walked over and picked up the scorched envelope again. This was never just a warning. It was permission. "They're telling us we're on the board now." Jack rubbed his eyes. He was exhausted, but adrenaline had his nerves wired. "We digitize everything," he said. "Multiple backups, hidden drives. If they try to burn this down again, We make sure the truth is already out there. Emma narrowed her eyes. We go to the press. Jack shook his head. No, not yet. Local news won't touch this, it's too tangled. But there's someone who might help. He pulled out a card from his wallet. Harper Doyle, investigative journalist. They'd served together overseas. She'd covered post-conflict corruption in Ukraine and blown the whistle on a private military firm in West Africa. If anyone knows how to turn evidence into headlines, he said it's her. He sent the files with a note. Need verification. Possible federal fraud via banking system, Ashford Trust. Source files attached. Urgent. Then he turned to Emma. We hold tight. If we move too fast, we lose the advantage. She nodded. But if we wait too long, they'll bury us like they buried your father. Late that night, Jack returned to the bank alone. Diesel stayed close, his posture tense. He walked through the vault again, checking every cabinet, every file. In the back corner of the room, he noticed a panel he hadn't seen before. Metal flush with the wall. It looked like part of the HVAC, but the screws were mismatched, tampered. He removed them one by one. Inside was a small compartment, and inside that, a cassette tape. Labeled in neat handwriting, Final Statement, ER. Jack's pulse surged. Eugene Rayburn. He pulled out his old field recorder from his gear bag, slid the tape in, and hit play. A hiss of static. Then a voice. Calm, measured. This is Eugene Rayburn. If you're hearing this, then I've failed to stop them. But maybe you still can. Jack's throat tightened. They're not just laundering money, the voice continued. They're moving people. Names, locations, identities slipped through banking code. Witnesses from federal trials. Disappearances that never made headlines. The vault isn't a vault. It's a pipeline. Jack sat down hard. The tape ended abruptly. He stared at it for a long moment, trying to process the implications. Not just financial crime. Human trafficking. Hidden behind fake nonprofits and banks in dying towns no one paid attention to. Jack looked up at Diesel, whose ears twitched, but body remained still. This goes deeper than I ever imagined. He pocketed the tape. Tomorrow they will go to Harper, but tonight they will prepare. Because war was coming. Harper Doyle arrives and helps connect the scheme to a much larger federal investigation, and a mole inside the Ashford Sheriff's Department is revealed. This isn't a scandal, it's a system, and Ashford was just one spoke in the wheel. Harper Doyle's boots hit Ashford's cracked pavement like she owned it. She stepped out of a dusty black Jeep just after dawn, sunglasses low on her nose bag, slung over one shoulder, and eyes scanning the main street like it was a war zone, and in some ways it was. Jack watched her from the cafe window and could already tell she hadn't lost a step since Kabul. He opened the door before she could knock. You look like hell, she said, offering a crooked smile. Good to see you too. They embraced briefly. Diesel sniffed her bag, gave a satisfied huff, and wandered back to his spot by the counter. Harper dropped her gear and pulled out a flash drive. Got your files. Ran them through every system I trust, which, let's be honest, is basically just me and an old laptop I don't let touch Wi-Fi. What you have isn't just damning, it's radioactive. Jack raised an eyebrow. That bad? She nodded. Jack, this isn't a scandal. It's a system. And Ashford was just one spoke in the wheel. Emma poured coffee silently in the background, listening. Harper spun the laptop around. Croft Holdings is a shell, yeah, but it's tied to 8 other LLCs across 5 states. Every one of them was involved in federal infrastructure bids post 9/11, Homeland Security, FEMA, even Department of Education grants. Each time, money moved through fake nonprofits just like the Ashford Foundation. Clean on paper, hollow inside. Jack leaned closer. So this wasn't just about laundering money. They were creating fake institutions to reroute federal contracts. And pocket the difference, Harper added. Or worse, fund black budget operations off the books. Emma frowned. What kind of operations? Harper hesitated. Ghost networks, housing identities, relocating witnesses, in a few cases, extracting people the government didn't want found again. Jack's mind went to Eugene Rayburn's voice on the tape. A pipeline. This goes beyond what we can handle alone, he said. Harper nodded. Which is why I made a call. Jack looked up, alarmed. To who? Harper hesitated. A contact inside the DOJ. He owes me for a piece I buried last year. I told him it was coming from an independent whistleblower. He'll listen. Emma leaned on the counter, arms crossed. Do you trust him? Harper shrugged. As much as I trust anyone in D.C. Before Jack could reply, his phone buzzed again. Unknown number. He answered cautiously. Rourke. The voice on the other end was quiet. Male. Shaky. You don't know me, but I work in the sheriff's office. I've seen your name on internal files. They're tracking you. Jack glanced at Harper and Emma. Who is this? Doesn't matter. Just know that Sheriff McNamara isn't who he says he is. He's not running damage control. He's managing the cover-up. Jack stepped outside, shielding his voice from the others. Why are you helping me? Because I saw what they did to Eugene. I saw the footage they destroyed. I made a copy. I've kept it hidden. Where? Oh, pause. Old pump station off Route 6, south entrance. Check the blue locker. Number 34, it's there. Then the line went dead. Jack turned back to Harper. We've got a mole. They drove in silence. The old pump station looked like a forgotten relic, rusted fencing weeds taller than Jack, and a chain loosely looped around the gate but never locked. Harper stayed in the Jeep, watching the road. Emma stood outside with Diesel while Jack moved inside. Locker 34 was real. Blue. Dented. Padlocked but easy enough to pop. Inside a single item. A VHS tape. Jack pulled it out and the label long faded. He tucked it into his coat and jogged back to the Jeep. They drove straight to the bank where the only working VCR in town sat in Eli's back office. The three of them gathered around the old monitor. Jack inserted the tape. Static. Then grainy footage flickered to life. A timestamp, Sept 26, 2002, 2:12 a.m. They watched in silence as Eugene Rayburn stepped into the vault, briefcase in hand. His body tense. He looked over his shoulder more than once. He opened the briefcase. Inside, printed ledgers, marked documents, what looked like photographs. Suddenly another figure entered. Sheriff McNamara. No uniform, just a black coat and gloves. They exchanged words silently, no audio. Eugene looked panicked. He pointed toward the briefcase. Then McNamara stepped forward. He grabbed Eugene's arm, shoved him back. A struggle. Eugene fell, and the door sealed. Jack stood frozen as the screen cut to black. Emma's hand flew to her mouth. They locked him alive. Harper looked sick, and then erased every trace of it. Jack turned off the machine. We leak this, McNamara falls. But we need more documents. chains of custody paper trails that connect him directly to Croft. Harper opened her laptop. Then we dig into the Ashford Foundation again. Somewhere in there is the smoking gun. Emma's voice was quiet. We're running out of time. Jack looked at them both. Then we move now. That night, Jack returned to the cafe to find the door ajar. He stepped inside carefully. No broken glass. No overturned furniture. But on the counter sat a photo. It was of Emma, taken from a distance. She was walking diesel outside the bank. On the back, scrawled in marker, "You're not invisible. Neither is she." Jack's hand tightened around the photo until it crumpled. This wasn't a game anymore. It was war. The team finds forged land deeds proving the town was collateral damage for a government laundering pipeline, but someone close to Emma is revealed to be feeding information to the enemy. Ashford wasn't collateral, it was a test site. The box was buried 6 feet beneath what used to be the Rayburns' backyard shed. Emma's hands trembled as she unearthed it, dirt crusted under her nails. Her breath ragged from both effort and emotion. Jack stood beside her, shovel in hand, heart pounding. They'd followed a single clue, an old sticky note tucked in the last pages of Eugene's journal. Faded ink, barely legible. If they take me, it's not in the bank. It's home, under the pine. Now the small metal lockbox sat in the dirt streaked with rust and time. Emma opened it slowly. Inside, manila envelopes, dozens of them, each labeled in her father's handwriting. Ashford Foundation Real Estate Acquisitions. DOJ bid proposals rejected. Red flag clients' sealed accounts. But one stood out. It was thicker, heavier. On the front, just 2 words, the map. Jack opened it. Unfolded across the lawn was a large township zoning chart dated 2001. But it wasn't just zoning. It was overlaid with red ink, black arrows, and symbols that looked like federal tags. Entire blocks of Ashford marked. Industrial lots, public schools, post office, the old grain silo, even the water plant. Properties that were sold off, demolished, or restructured over the last 2 decades. Every one of them connected to shell companies Jack and Harper had traced to Croft Holdings. Harper stared at the map, her voice barely above a whisper. This isn't embezzlement. It's an engineered collapse. Jack nodded. They didn't just steal. They rewrote the future of the town from the inside out. He pointed to a series of plot numbers circled in blue. These were transferred to Croft-affiliated trusts just months before the bank collapsed. Most of them were purchased for a fraction of their value. No public record of the transactions, just forged land deeds. Emma pulled out another envelope and opened it. Inside were copies of the deeds signed by the town clerk, or so it seemed. Wait, she said, squinting at the signatures. That's not Mary's handwriting. Mary Talbot had been the town clerk in 2002. Still was. Jack held the documents to the light. The signature was a scan pasted digitally, not hand-signed. Fraudulent. They used Mary's name to sell off half the town, Harper said, then used the bank collapse as cover. Clean sweep. Emma stared at the paper, rage simmering under her skin. My dad saw all of this coming. That's why he hid it. Why did they make him disappear? Jack looked at the map again, tracing the connections. The same 5 LLCs popped up on every title, all tied back to Croft. Everyone. But here's the question, Harper said, scanning the documents. Why Ashford? Why here? Jack hesitated. Then something clicked. He reached into his satchel and pulled out the memo from Vault 2. Phase 1 Terminal Node. He laid it beside the map. Harper's eyes widened. Oh no. What Emma asked. Harper pointed to a line of text at the bottom of the memo. Phase 2 activation, pending site Alpha confirmed. Jack, she said this wasn't just a scam. It was a prototype. He nodded slowly, realization sinking in like concrete. Ashford wasn't collateral, it was a test site. They didn't just destroy a town, they proved they could do it and get away with it. Ashford was the blueprint. Later that night, they gathered in Emma's apartment above the cafe. Documents covered every surface. Strings, notes, timestamps. Jack was cataloging everything into digital folders, while Harper cross-referenced names with known federal subcontractors. Emma stared blankly at the wall mind running in 1,000 directions. Then her phone buzzed. A text from her Uncle Dean. We need to talk. Tonight. Alone. She frowned. Dean had been distant since her dad's death. A once cheerful mechanic he now kept to himself ran a garage on the edge of town and rarely answered his phone. He never asked to meet. Not like this, she showed Jack. He looked uneasy. Could be nothing. Could be something. I'll go, she said. If there's even a chance he knows something. Jack nodded. Take Diesel. The garage lights flickered weakly as Emma pulled into the lot. Diesel hopped out first, ears twitching. He didn't growl, but he didn't move forward either. Emma approached the office slowly. The door creaked as she opened it. Dean was there, sitting behind the desk, a bottle of whiskey in front of him. He looked up. Tired, hollow-eyed. You really shouldn't be digging through your dad's past, he said. Emma stiffened. Why Dean sighed. Because it wasn't just his. She stayed quiet. Dean stood, reached into a locked drawer and pulled out a folder. He slid it across the desk. Emma opened it. Inside letters, receipts, notes, her father's handwriting, and Dean's. You helped him, she whispered. Dean nodded. At first, he thought he could fix it. Thought exposing the internal theft would be enough. But she asked. Dean took a deep swig of whiskey. Then he found out about McNamara, and the vault, and the people they moved. He wanted to go public. I told him not to. Told him they'd come for him. He met her eyes. And then they did. Emma's voice cracked. Why didn't you say something? I was scared, Dean said. Still am. But when I saw your name on that list, he slid over another piece of paper. A surveillance photo of Emma walking the street. Same as the one left on the cafe counter. They know you're involved now. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. Dean leaned in. They won't just warn you next time. She returned to the apartment just past midnight. Jack and Harper looked up. You were right, she said, voice heavy. Someone close was hiding something. She handed Jack the folder. But he's not the only one. Jack opened it and froze. Inside were additional transfer logs. Names, signatures. One in particular stood out. D. Whitmore. Jack stared at it. Eli, he whispered. He said he burned everything. But he didn't. Harper leaned over. He signed off on an internal wiring order, a week after the vault supposedly shut down. Emma's jaw clenched. Jack stood up, grabbed his coat. We trusted him. He's been feeding them from the beginning. Harper grabbed her recorder. Then let's go see what he's still hiding. The confrontation with Eli explodes as Jack learns the old man traded secrets to protect someone he loved, forcing Jack to choose between justice and vengeance. Sometimes the cost of silence isn't your soul, it's someone else's. The air around Eli Whitmore's cabin was still. Too still. Jack slowed the truck as they approached, headlights off. Diesel sat bolt upright in the back seat, ears pinned, nose twitching. Emma sat next to Jack, eyes locked on the porch. Harper checked the recorder on her lap, fingers steady expression, stone cold. They weren't here for questions anymore. They were here for the truth. Jack stepped out first, boots hitting gravel. He motioned for Emma to hang back, but she followed anyway. Harper brought up the rear recorder in hand, already rolling. They approached the front door. No lights inside. No movement. Jack knocked. Once. Twice. Eli, he called out. We know. Silence. Then a slow creak as the door opened from inside. Eli stood there, a shadow in the dim porch light. His eyes were tired, red-rimmed, and his shotgun was nowhere in sight. I figured you'd come. Jack pushed past him without asking. Diesel followed, hackles only half-raised, cautious, not aggressive. Emma stepped inside, hands clenched. Harper remained by the door, recording. Jack turned. You lied to us. Eli nodded. I did. Jack slammed the manila folder on the table. You told me you torched everything, that you were just a bystander. I never said I was innocent, Eli replied, sitting down slowly. I said I tried to forget. Emma stepped forward. You signed off on a reroute a week after the vault was supposed to be shut down. You knew Eugene was in there. Eli flinched at the name. I didn't know they left him inside. Jack stared at him. But you helped them seal the vault. Eli looked down at his calloused hands. They gave me two choices: sign off on the reroute, or they'd come after my son. Emma blinked. What son? Eli reached for an old photo frame on the mantel. He handed it to Jack. A boy, maybe 17, smiling beside a younger Eli. He was in juvie for theft, minor stuff. But he got mixed up in something bigger. Something they could have used to lock him up for years. When Croft's people came to me, they said, do the work, keep your mouth shut, and your kid walks. Jack's voice was low. And you believed them. Eli's mouth tightened. I had nothing left to believe in. My wife was gone. My pension vanished with the bank. And my boy was all I had left. So yeah, I signed. Emma's voice trembled. And what about my father? He was trying to stop them. Eli met her eyes. I told him not to go in that vault. Told him it was too late. But Eugene, he had this fire. This belief that the truth mattered more than anything else. He swallowed hard. And I let him walk into that vault alone. Harper finally stepped forward. You said they came after you. Who's they? Eli names, not ghosts. Eli hesitated. McNamara was the face. But the orders came from someone else. Guy named Vince Garrow out of D.C. Smooth Talker. Said he was a contractor. But he had been fed badges. Real ones. He used the Ashford Foundation as a front and ran the cleanups. Jack stiffened. He's still active. Last I heard, he was setting up another front in Missouri. Different towns. Same game. Harper cursed under her breath. The whole system's mobile. Ashford was the prototype. Jack took a deep breath. You still have the access codes to the backup servers? Eli reached under the floorboards and pulled out a battered USB drive. Everything I had left. Proof of the wire transfers. Even a voice memo Vince left me by mistake. He thought he was calling McNamara. He handed it to Jack. Harper grabbed her laptop and plugged the drive in, eyes wide as the file list appeared. This is it. This could nail half a dozen people to the wall. But Jack wasn't looking at the screen. He was looking at Eli. You could have told us from the start. Saved us days of circling in the dark. Eli nodded slowly. Sometimes the cost of silence isn't your soul, it's someone else's. Jack said nothing. Emma broke the silence. So what happens now? Harper closed the laptop. Now we take this public. Eli stood. Then let me help. Jack raised an eyebrow. Why now? Because if I don't, Eli said, then Eugene really did die for nothing. And I don't want my son living in a world where men like Garrow get to win. Back at the bank, they set up a secure hotspot and encrypted the files from the USB drive. Harper forwarded them to 3 trusted journalists, 1 DOJ contact, and a war crimes analyst she knew from Berlin. The response was immediate. 2 phone calls, 1 warning. Then just before sunrise, a 3rd contact messaged back. You're in danger. Garrow's team is en route. They know you're going public. Jack shut the laptop. They're coming. Emma's voice was barely a whisper. For us, so Jack said. For the evidence. He turned to Harper. We upload the last of it to a public blockchain. Immutable, decentralized. Once it's there, they can't stop it. She nodded, already typing. Diesel paced by the window. Jack turned to Eli. You still remember how to wire a trap? Eli's eyes narrowed. I've been waiting 20 years to wire the right one. Outside, the early morning fog rolled in thicker than usual. The town was still asleep. But Ashford wasn't quiet anymore. Justice was waking up, and so were its enemies. The final siege, Garrow's team arrives to destroy the last physical evidence, forcing Jack, Emma, Harper, and Eli into a last stand to protect the truth and each other. If we fall here, at least we fall loud enough for the world to hear us. Ashford was quiet. Not peaceful quiet. That kind of silence that sinks in before something breaks. Fog hung thick over Main Street, blurring the edges of the abandoned bank building. A single street lamp flickered. Inside, the old security lights buzzed to life, casting a dull glow over rows of crates, scattered evidence, and the digital war room Harper had turned the vault into. Jack stood at the center, watching the security monitor. 3 SUVs had parked just outside the tree line, half a mile down Route 9. They hadn't turned off their headlights. 3 minutes, Harper said, eyes locked on her laptop. They're still trying to jam our uplink. Eli was crouched near the front door, threading a cable behind a torn-out baseboard. Jack moved beside him. How many are we rigging? 4 charges, Eli muttered. Non-lethal. Just enough to make them hesitate. Emma came down from the 2nd floor, Diesel at her heel. She handed Jack a bundle of hard drives. Last backups, just in case. He nodded and stuffed them in a reinforced bag, then handed it to Harper. If it goes sideways, he said, you and Emma take the alley. Run like hell. Harper didn't look up. Not happening. I'm not asking. Jack snapped. Harper finally met his eyes. We fall here, at least we fall loud enough for the world to hear us. Emma stood frozen, watching both of them, then finally said, let's not fall at all. Jack gave a grim nod. Then the bank lights went out. Total darkness. Diesel growled low in his throat. Harper cursed. Power cut. Backup battery, Emma asked. Still running the router, Harper said. Just barely. Jack turned to Eli. You ready? Eli stood slowly, flipping the final switch on his crude control panel. Been ready for 20 years. Outside, the SUVs rolled forward. Black-clad figures spilled out tactical gear, suppressed rifles, and radio mics. No uniforms, no insignias, just shadows with guns. A man emerged, last tall, clean-shaven, sharp suit under a flak vest. Vince Garrow. He surveyed the street with cold efficiency, then pointed 2 fingers toward the bank. Sweep. Quiet. The first team moved in. 4 men flanked the entrance, checked windows. 1 raised a crowbar. Inside, Jack gave Eli the nod. Click. The charge exploded with a flash and concussive boom, sending a shockwave through the front steps. The lead intruders were thrown backward. Smoke poured into the street. Emma ducked behind the vault's steel door, pulling Diesel close. First team's down, Harper whispered, watching the feed. They'll get smarter now. Jack grabbed his sidearm. Let 'em. Outside, Garrow didn't flinch. He turned to the second squad. Breach the back. Kill the power. Kill the feeds. They moved fast around the block through the alley. Inside, Harper's monitor began to flicker. They're cutting through the server junction. Jack grabbed the hard drives, shoved them into Emma's arms. Go. Now. She shook her head. Not without you. Diesel barked low and urgent. They'll destroy everything, Harper said. If that uplink dies, it all goes with it. Jack turned to Eli. Can you hold them? Eli cracked his knuckles. I'll give them hell. Jack looked back at Emma, then pressed the drives into her chest. Protect the truth. She kissed him once, brief, breathless. Then she and Harper disappeared down the basement steps, Diesel at their heels. Jack turned to the vault. Time to make a stand. Eli crouched near the rear stairwell, eyes on the motion sensor. The second team breached the fire exit just as planned. He triggered the second charge. A flashbang detonated in the stairwell, slamming 2 men into the wall. The others scattered. Then a shot rang out, live fire. Concrete chipped inches from Eli's shoulder. He ducked, pulled a smoke grenade from his kit, and rolled it down the hall. Come on, you bastards, he muttered. Jack moved through the vault, shutting cabinets, grabbing the last physical ledgers. Fireproof satchels over both shoulders, he made his way toward the records room. Then the feed on Harper's laptop went black. All of it. No cameras. No connection. Uplink dead. A voice crackled on the backup radio. Jack. They're inside. It was Harper. We're safe, she continued. But the files are on us now. We can't go back. Jack exhaled. Then we don't let them leave with anything. He reached for the manual override on the vault's magnetic door. Eli's voice came through another channel. They've breached the stairwell. I'm out of traps. Jack looked toward the ceiling above the vault, right where the old sprinkler system had been patched up years ago. He ran to the panel, yanked it open. Inside, a final dusty gas line, abandoned but intact. He looked at the old wiring diagrams, then the lighter clipped to his belt. Outside, Garrow stood calmly checking his watch. He spoke into his earpiece. Status. Final chamber breached, came the reply. No resistance. Looks empty. Garrow frowned. Then a boom shook the foundation. Smoke poured out of the rear windows. Sir, his man said through the radio, we triggered something. A second explosion cut the feed. The ground trembled. Garrow stepped back as flames rolled from the vault's ventilation grates. Not a fire to destroy records. A fire to bury the men trying to silence them. In the alley, Harper and Emma sprinted through the fog, Diesel leading them toward the tree line. The cafe came into view, Jack's truck, parked keys hidden under the front fender. Emma turned back toward the column of smoke rising from the bank. Jack, she whispered. But Jack wasn't dead. He emerged through the vault's hidden side passage, one Eli had kept secret even from him. Burned, coughing, bleeding, but alive. Behind him, the fire ate through decades of lies. Ahead of him, daylight, and one final reckoning. The truth finally reaches the world, but Jack must confront Garrow one last time alone in a final battle that decides who owns the future of Ashford and the soul of everyone who dared to fight back. The ashes of Ashford Bank still hung in the morning air, like a memory refusing to die. Jack sat on the edge of the hill overlooking town, bandaged ribs stiff under his coat, Diesel resting beside him, with one paw on his boot. From here he could see the smoldering skeleton of the bank, blackened beams jutting toward the sky like broken fingers. The vault was gone. So were the ledgers, the hard drives, the physical proof. But it didn't matter anymore. The story was already out. Harper's leak had gone live hours earlier through encrypted channels, dead drops, and open-source whistleblower platforms. The files spread like wildfire. Thousands of pages of forged deeds, doctored transactions, photos, signatures, and the tape of Eugene Rayburn being locked in by Sheriff McNamara. Names, dates, ties to DC black sites, offshore accounts. Even Garrow's own voice giving the order to silence a terminal asset. It couldn't be stopped now. By the time federal agents arrived in Ashford just after sunrise, they weren't coming to investigate. They were coming to arrest me. Emma stood in front of the cafe, arms crossed, watching as Garrow was led into a black SUV in handcuffs, blood trailing from a split lip. Jack had left that part out of the official story. What happened in the alley behind the hardware store, the final confrontation, was between him, Garrow, and the ghost of Eugene Rayburn. The man had begged, not for mercy, for silence. "You can burn the system down," Garrow had hissed, "but you'll still be standing in the ruins." Jack had looked him in the eye and said, "Better to stand in ashes than kneel in lies." Then he hit him once hard and called Harper. It was over. Eli had been taken to the hospital 2 towns over. Smoke inhalation, cracked ribs, but he was alive, and more importantly, free. When federal agents tried to take him into custody, Jack stepped in. "He's a witness," he told them, "not a suspect." One of the younger agents had read Eli's confession, then nodded. "He'll testify." Eli would spend the rest of his life making up for the silence he once chose. He said that was more punishment than prison ever could be. The press swarmed Ashford by noon. National anchors, local reporters, documentary teams. Everyone wanted a piece of the fallen town that brought down Croft Holdings, implicated 2 sitting senators, and exposed a decade-long operation that weaponized small towns as laundering hubs. But Jack stayed out of sight. So did Emma and Harper. They'd done their part. The rest was for the world to deal with. That night, they gathered at the edge of the clearing near Eugene's grave, an unmarked spot under the old pine where Emma had buried a piece of her father's journal and a small metal nameplate engraved with just one word: truth. Jack lit a candle and placed it in the grass. "Funny," he said softly, "the world only knows his name now because he died in silence. But in the end, he screamed louder than any of us." Emma didn't cry. Not this time. Her grief had hardened into something else, resolve. "He didn't die for nothing," she said. No, Harper added, "he died for everyone who thought nobody would ever listen." They stood in silence for a long time. Then Jack took a folded piece of paper from his coat and handed it to Emma. "What's this?" she asked. "Offer from the state," he said. "They're giving you the deeds back. Everything stolen under your dad's name. The land, the cafe, even the Rayburn house." Emma stared at it, stunned. That can't be real. It is. Public restitution. They want to make a show of it. Harper smirked. Ashford's officially becoming the cautionary tale they have to fix. Emma tucked the paper into her coat. Then we make sure they do. The weeks passed slowly. FBI investigations turned into grand jury subpoenas. Names were named. Careers ended. Whistleblowers came forward in other towns inspired by Ashford's story. What had once been hidden was now studied in law schools, cited in Congress, even adapted into podcasts and op-eds. But for Jack, the noise faded. He started repairing the cabin near the lake, the one Eugene had once taken Emma to when she was a child. Diesel spent his mornings chasing ducks. Harper moved on to her next story, though she stayed in touch, always dropping bits of intel and conspiracy in his inbox like breadcrumbs. Emma reopened the cafe. Only this time, it wasn't just a cafe. It had a reading room, a bulletin board of free legal resources, and every Thursday she hosted a community roundtable called Open Books, where locals could talk about accountability, corruption, or just healing. Ashford didn't bounce back overnight, but it breathed again. And that was enough. One evening, just as the sun dipped behind the hills and painted the sky with gold, Emma joined Jack on the dock behind the cabin. She handed him a cold beer and sat beside him, their shoulders touching. "You ever think," she said, "about what would have happened if you hadn't bought that damn bank?" Jack grinned. "Yeah. I'd probably be drinking a warm beer in Texas and wondering why my dog won't stop staring at walls." Emma chuckled, then looked out over the lake. "You saved this place." Jack shook his head. "We did." She nudged him. "Still doesn't explain why you paid $10 for a rotting building." He turned to her, eyes soft. "Because some things are worth more than they are broken," he said. "They just need the right people to see what's left inside." She smiled, and for the first time in a long time, it felt like the end of something that deserved an ending. Not a tragedy, not a secret, just truth. Truth is not always loud. Sometimes it sits buried in forgotten vaults waiting for the right hands to open it. And when it comes out, it may not fix everything, but it breaks the silence. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change the world.